Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, is in London today for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Those happened a little earlier. And the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Mr Rutte, who was previously the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, has said the three priorities for his term as Secretary-General are to support Ukraine, to bolster NATO's collective deterrence and to build relationships in other parts of the world, such as the Indo-Pacific. He became the Secretary-General just 10 days ago, and he joins me now. Mr Rutte, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us on BBC News in what is your first live broadcast interview since becoming boss of the alliance. Let's begin with Ukraine, because you've been meeting President Zelensky here in London a little earlier. You travelled there on your first official visit as Secretary-General as well, very symbolic. You spoke of how Ukraine was facing its most difficult winter since the Russian invasion. So I wonder how NATO, under your leadership, is going to approach the question differently as to how to bring an end to this war.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the program. And to come to your question, it's crucial for Ukraine to prevail, and we have to avoid that Putin would get his way with and in Ukraine, because it's not only a problem for Ukraine, it is also a threat to all of us here in the UK, all over NATO, including Canada and the US. If Russia would be successful in Ukraine, it would be a security threat to all of us. So we have to massively continue what we are doing first, and that is to put military aid into Ukraine, to make sure that we have enough training ready for the soldiers, the brave soldiers from Ukraine, and the brave people who are working there to counter the Russian onslaught. At the same time, we have to implement what we agreed in Washington during the summit. And particularly, this is the command we are now setting up in Germany to basically coordinate all the activities all over NATO allies and others to make sure that this aid gets into Ukraine. And, of course, the so-called 40 billion euro pledge, where we decided collectively to make sure that that money is available long-term. And this is, of course, at least for the first year, but then also longer-term we have to find that money. And we have to work on the bilateral security agreements as they are now being negotiated between Ukraine and various allies.
But would you support Ukraine being given access to longer range missiles to be able to fire those deeper into Russia? Militarily, we've heard from former senior commanders in Europe saying that Ukraine's allies need to be firmer, that dither and delay, as one of them put it, is not in Ukraine's interest. So would you personally support the use by Ukraine of longer range missiles to fire deeper into Russia?
Let me be very specific. First of all, Ukraine is allowed legally to strike targets in Russia when these targets pose a threat to Ukraine. So legally this is possible. My second element of my answer will be that it is not one weapon system which will change the outcome of this conflict. And then, of course, it is up to the individual allies to decide when they deliver weapon systems into Ukraine, how they can be used, and what kind of commitments they give in terms of for Ukraine to use these systems. This is not up to the alliance as a whole. This is up to the individual ally members.
So should allies go it alone in terms of saying to Ukraine, yes, we would be supportive of you using those missiles on a more regular basis? Should the UK go it alone, for example?
They could do this, but this is in the end a decision by the UK government. It's not a decision NATO can take.
Would you be supportive of that, though, as an individual?
Well, of course, I'm chairing the whole of the alliance, and I cannot decide for individual member states what to do. I can only say that legally it is possible, but of course there are many considerations to be taken into account. And again, let's not think that just one weapon system and changing the use of that system, including the long-range capability, that one weapon system is in itself going to change the outcome of this conflict.
We've only got about 7 minutes, lots to discuss. One more quick point on Ukraine, if I may, on the subject of membership. We saw recently the Slovak Prime Minister saying that as long as he's in power, he will block Ukrainian membership. What are you going to do to try to build consensus on that?
Well, clearly what we decided in Washington unanimously is that there is an irreversible path towards membership of NATO for Ukraine. Then, of course, the question is how to take this to the next steps and the next stage of this. And it really has to be done step by step. And that's something, of course, amongst allies we will discuss over the coming month, including up to the summit in The Hague and beyond. Because this is a very sensitive issue, it is an important issue. What I said last week in Kiev when I visited Volodymyr Zelensky and his team is that one thing has to be absolutely clear. That Russia does not have a vote on this and that Russia does not have a veto on this. Every country in the area of NATO can apply for membership, and that is a sovereign decision for that individual country.
Let's talk now, if we may, about the position of the USA in the NATO alliance. We know that former President Trump, has questioned funding to Ukraine from NATO. He's questioned funding to the alliance more broadly. Just a few weeks out from the presidential election in November, what are your concerns if there is another President Trump America First presidency?
I'm convinced, because I've worked with Donald Trump for 4 years in my previous role as Dutch Prime Minister when he was President of the United States, that he is fully aware of the fact that for the US to stay safe, that NATO membership and being an active member in the alliance is crucial for the United States. It's not just their NATO because they wanted to correct after the Second World War.
It's a little at odds. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Rutte. It's a little at odds with some of his public statements, though, isn't it?
I've learned over the years with politicians, having been one myself, that the public statements are one thing, but you also have to listen very careful what is behind those statements. You have to really look into what happens in the one-on-one conversations. And what I have sensed over all these years with Donald Trump is that he staunchly wants to defend the United States, that he understands that to defend the United States against any threat, they cannot go it alone. They have to be part of this all-powerful alliance, NATO, which is able to fend off any adversary from wherever they will attack us. And that is also on the other issue of the support for Ukraine if Donald Trump would be elected, and I'm absolutely convinced that that support will continue, because if Ukraine would not prevail and Putin would get his way, that would be a threat to the United States. And he wants to defend his country. So I'm absolutely convinced this will work out fine. And the same, by the way, with Kamala Harris. So we have to see what the outcome of the election will be.
Now, under your leadership, nonetheless, are we going to see more of a pivot towards European members of the alliance developing their resilience, their capabilities, more of a Europe for Europe approach? And on the question of funding, what are you going to do to ensure that those countries, I think 8 members of the alliance currently not meeting that 2% of GDP target, is that going to be difficult given that the Dutch, and you were Prime Minister for 14 years, they are only this year meeting their commitments on spending for NATO?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So we were late. Luckily, we are now on the 2%, but I absolutely accept your point that the Netherlands were late under my leadership. So, but I'm absolutely happy that at the moment we are at the 2%, somewhat above even. But you're also absolutely right that every member of the alliance has to do what they have committed. So I will work tirelessly to make sure not only that we will all get to the 2%, but we also need to debate to close the gaps, to meet the targets we have set out. And we all know that we need more than the 2%. By the way, the good news is that 10 years ago it was only 3 countries delivering 2%. Now it is 23. And NATO, if you would exempt the US, is now as a collective on 2%. So discarding US, if you would count them out, then it is already on 2%. So that is good news. It's not enough. Some member states need to do more. And as an alliance as a whole, we also need to do more. And that debate I'm happy to have with every member state, with every ally in NATO.
Is the UK doing enough? And you, as the new Secretary General of NATO, talking to the new UK Prime Minister, have you received any further assurances from the UK?
Well, first of all, the UK was one of the 3 countries, together with Greece and the US in 2014, already above the 2%. And they have now committed to the 2.5%. I'm very happy about that, because I think that is really leading the way. It will also inspire others to do more. And of course, the UK is delivering some unique capabilities, including the nuclear deterrent, which is vital for NATO, that it is there and that the UK is taking a leading role on this. So I'm very positive, and obviously also in the UK. And you are working on a comprehensive defence review in this country, and no doubt you will find that more needs to be done in certain areas. That's always the case, but I found here a government and a Prime Minister and a Foreign Secretary and a Defence Secretary all very much committed to deliver.
Mark Rutte, new Secretary General of NATO, appreciate your time. You've given us a little bit more than the 7 minutes, I think. So really grateful for that. Good to talk to you on the BBC.
Thank
Mark
you so
Rutte.
much.